Hello there, everybody. This is Jim Ransom, and this is Morning Jim Poetry on Saturday, the 24th of June. Now, I hope that you haven't tuned in by mistake. If so, it's still early. You can tune in another channel right away, and you'll be none the worse for it. But for everyone else, today we're going to hear a Congeries, that's all I can call it, a Congeries of poems by a wildly disparate trio of poets. The first one will be John Crowe Ransom, and then we're going to hear from Kevin Young, and then Hilaire Belloc. What? Yeah, that's right. And here's the first selection. It's titled Dog by John Crowe Ransom. You know, when I'm doing this, I have to sort of dig around for my books and hope that I have marked them in the right spot. Dog. Cock-a-doodle-doo, the brass-lined rooster goes. Brekakakakeks intones the fat Greek frog. These fantasies do not worry me, as does the bow-wow-wow of a dog. I had a doggy who used to sit and beg, a pretty little creature with tears in his eyes, and anomalous hand extended on a leg. Housebroken was my hunchin', and so wise. Booms a big dog's voice like a fireman's bell, but Fido sits at dusk on Madame's lap, and bored beyond his tongue's poor skill to tell, rehearses his pink paradigm to yap. However, up the lane, the tender bull proceeds unto his kine. He yearns for them, whose eyes adore him and are beautiful. Love speeds him, and no treason or mayhem. But, having come to the gateway in the fence, listen, again the hateful barking dog, like a numerous army rattling the battlements with shout, though it is but his monologue, with lion's courage and sting bee's virulence, though he is but one dog. Shrill is the fury of the royal bull, his knees quiver, and a honeysuckle vine expires with anguish as his voice, dreadful, cries, "What do you want of my bonded lady kine?" Now the air trembles to the sorrowing moo of 20 blameless ladies of the mead who fear their lord's precarious set to. It is the sunset, and the heavens bleed. The hooves of the brave bull slither the claybank and cut the green tendrils of the vine. The horn slices the young birch into splinter and shank, but lunging, leaves the bitch's boy untorn. Across the late sky comes Master, Hodge by name, upright, two-legged, tall-browed, and self-assured, in his hand a cudgel, in his blue eye a flame. Have I beat my dog so sore, and he is not cured? Old Hodge stays not his hand, but whips to kennel the renegade. God's peace betide the souls of the pure in heart, but from the box in the fennel blaze 2 red eyes as hot as cooking coals. Well, okay, I think you got that. John Crowe Ransom was an interesting poet. He liked to use outdated words at just the right place in his vocabulary. like when he was talking about the female cows, he says, "What do you want of my bonded lady kine?" Kine, which is a very obsolete word for cow. And of course, he says, "Housebroken was my Hündchen," which is the German word for dog. And he rhymes, "Fido sits at dusk on Madame's lap." And then in the rhyming line, he rehearses his pink paradigm to yap. He rhymes lap and lap and yap. I like that. So, what's going on in this poem? Well, obviously, it's a country poem. There's a hound running around in the farmyard who finds his way to the sound of the bull trying to come in through the gate. And so he's going to take the bull on. Foolish dogs frequently do foolish things. But in this case, the bull was not able to bump and slap and horn the dog. And in this case, he says that the horn slices the young birch into splinter and shank, but lunging leaves the bitch's boy untorn. That's the dog, of course. And then comes the master, Hodge, who doesn't want his cows damaged, and especially not his expensive bull. So he takes his stick to the dog and drives him off. And so the lady cows are made happy, and the bull gets his way. And God's peace betide the souls of the pure in heart, he says. But from the box in the fennel blaze two red eyes as hot as cooking coals. What does that mean? The box in the fennel. Well, the fennel is another obsolete word for hay from Old England. And of course, the two red eyes and that are as hot as cooking coals are the hound who was after the bull, but didn't quite get there. So I think that's quite a well done poem. I mean, it's got all sorts of wildlife in it, from the cock-a-doodle-doo, from the rooster, and the brekkekex intones the fat Greek frog, and the bow-wow-wow of the dog, and so on and so forth. He's taking us through the whole trek of the farmstead. And I like it. I like what he's put together there. It's very unusual. John Crowe Ransom spent his college days at Oxford, where he got infiltrated or overcome by his studies of poetry and ancient British history. And so he went back to Kenyon College, where he stayed the rest of his career and taught hundreds, maybe thousands of students. And he was a very popular poet in the 1930s and 1940s. And he made quite a name for himself. And it's the same as my name, but don't worry, we're not related. Like anything good or bad about me, you can't put it on the lap of John Crowe, Ransom. So, here's another poem. Now, this poem is very different. It is a poem by a modern poet, and it was just published this month in Poetry Magazine. So it's hot off the presses, so to speak. It's called The Stair, and it's by Kevin Young. The heart it hoards. How I know this? The small, strangled, shining room Keats lost his life in, and two. Beyond the window sunlight, arranging itself on the Spanish steps, while the poet watches. Outside, snapshots of the tourists and teenagers tired of what they don't know yet. What will become of us, Ash? Unasking. The death mask made by Keats. No longer breathing. Look at it. Not look at us. Beyond the window, the stairs stretch heavenward, stranded, without an ounce of shade. Okay. Well, what can we say about the stair? Well, we can say the poem is very spare. And you can see it here. I'll hold it up, how it's printed on the page. The Stair. And it's a non-rhyming poem, but it's very, very spare, and it tells its story in very brief language. So what is the story? Well, the story is taking place in the home of John Keats, the Romantic poet. And it has been preserved at home in England, and it's a tourist spot. So while the poet watches, outside snapshots of the tourists and teenagers tired of what they don't know yet. I love that line. Teenagers tired of what they don't know yet. They don't know poetry, for one thing. They don't know romantic poetry. They don't know the poetry of John Keats. All of that's in that one brief sentence. So he's speaking to us of the finality of death on top of the story part of the poem. And the stairs rising unshaded to the sky. A metaphor, isn't it? Kevin Young is currently the poetry editor of the New Yorker magazine. So he writes poetry of his own and sends it to Poetry Magazine. I think that Kevin Young has shown us a side of poetry that we don't see often enough, and that is a great story and a great metaphorical message in very few three-line stanzas, and no nastiness about it. It's straight to the point. Okay, here's a lighter and perhaps more ironic piece of poetry. We're going to turn to this. I've got several editions of Hilaire Belloc's Cautionary Tales for Children. I love his ironic and sometimes even sarcastic poetry. Hilaire Belloc. And in the poetry that he's written, there are great illustrations. In fact, I would encourage you all to read some of Hilaire Belloc just to get the illustrations by Basil Blackwood. There's the picture of Godolphin Horne, of whom we will hear more. Godolphin Horne was cursed with the sin of pride and became a bootblack. Godolphin Horne was nobly born. He held the human race in scorn and lived with his sisters where his father lived in Berkeley Square. And oh, this lad was deathly proud. He never shook your hand or bowed, but merely smirked and nodded thus. And here's a picture of him smirking and nodding to a nice person who has made way for him. How perfectly ridiculous, alas, that such affected tricks should flourish in a child of 6. For such was young Godolphin's age. Just then the court required a page, whereat the Lord High Chamberlain, and here's a picture of him, who is described as the kindest and the best of men, he went good-naturedly and took a perfectly enormous book called People Qualified to be Attendant on His Majesty, and murmured as he scanned the list to see that no one should be missed. Let's see, there's William Coots. He's got the flu. And Billy Higgs would never do. And Guy de Vere's far too young. And wasn't Dalton's father hung? And as for Alexander Byng, I think I know the kind of thing a churchman, cleanly, nobly born. Come, let us say, Godolphin Horne. But hardly had he said the word when murmurs of dissent were heard. The King of Iceland's eldest son said, "Thank you, I am taking none." The aged Duchess of Athlone remarked in her subacid tone, "I doubt if he is what we need." With which the bishops all agreed, and even Lady Mary Flood, so kind and oh, so really good, said, no, he wouldn't do at all. He'd make us feel a lot too small. The Chamberlain said, well, no doubt you're right. One cannot tell. He took his gold and diamond pen and scratched Godolphin out again. So now Godolphin is the boy who blacks the boots at the Savoy. And finally, here he is in his lost job. Oh, I love that poem. But that's not all. Next, we're going to read a poem about Hildebrand. Hildebrand, who was frightened by a passing motor and was brought to reason. And here's the picture of the passing motor and the young lad, Hildebrand. "Oh, murder! What was that, Papa?" "My child, it was a motor car, a most ingenious toy, designed to captivate and charm, much rather to arouse alarm in any English boy. What would your great-grandfather, who was aide-de-camp to General Brew. And here's a picture of him. What would he have said? He lost a leg at Waterloo, and Quatre Bras, and Ligny too. Must have been his fake leg at that point. And died at Trafalgar. What would he have remarked to hear his young descendant shriek with fear because he happened to be near a harmless motor car? But do not fret about it. Come, we'll off to town and purchase some. And wouldn't you know, there they are. I don't know what's the matter with my sense of humor, but I always love Hilaire Belloc, and I hope you do too. Well, anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this crazy mixture of poems, old and new, plus a little humor. I'll be back next week with a completely unrelated set of poems and verses, and I hope you are not so put off by today that you will leave me in the lurch next week. Oh no, come back. Be sure. Bye now.